Hello. Have a nice evening, afternoon, morning. Welcome to another round of my writing workshop. In the past few weeks, I did workshops on narration, about plot, about story. Much earlier in this year, I did a lot about publishing. You'll find all those recordings on my channel. Today, I want to continue the approach of creating a new novel and the steps necessary by, on the one side, creating new characters, creating a world based on actual research in terms of looking at what people buy on Amazon or in general what people search online. And I will also go back to my transcripts from 2 years ago and really read them and have you, and we will criticize them together. So if you have any comment, just write a comment. If you have any ideas or something like that, we'll just share it here. My last week, I started to basically outline the novel. I started here this Excel sheet with, it is in the very early beginnings here. You see, okay, we have a main character and the development through time. So we have on the x-axis the development through time, and here the main character. And what we didn't do last time is additional characters. We still have to figure out what we need in that regard. And we also inserted some locations. So there's all those locations. Here we laid out the development of the person in terms of their personal development, competency, confidence, and also here what is happening to the main character, and what we also had here, like external, the external world, how events impact the world of the novel and the characters, and what is going here on the side. Just as a summary, what is this novel about? So this I created a world for a game I'm currently working on, a card game, where there was an asteroid impact on Earth that shifted the power dynamics on Earth, creating 8 factions. And those 8 factions are using their resources to implement certain technologies, products, political changes, with the goal of dominating the political landscape and basically taking over the world with their individual projects. And in this world, we have one character. We haven't given a name yet, but in my novel, that is Catherine. And Catherine is that I put on the other one is here, a scientist who is on a mission to Venus, maybe also to Mars. And she discovers something there that has an impact on the political development on Earth. And what is going a lot in the background is technological advances while she's underway, or between missions, or between chapters, or between, maybe there are years in between, but there are technological advances that are explained. Maybe they were already developed. And so it's a mix out of mystery novel, science fiction novel, maybe some sort of cyberpunk, because it's a post-apocalyptic novel, but it's not a novel where basically everything broke down. So there's still some sort of order, but different order than we have today. And the idea, of course, is that it's an allegory. So especially when looking at the crises at the moment, so the asteroid impact is just a physical allegory on ongoing crisis with demography, with political problems, with resources, with the pandemic, etc. So, and the real question is, okay, what would happen if the US decided, with draw from the international field. So you have other players stepping up to the plate and taking some things over. We have technological advances that have a huge impact on our daily lives. And the corporations have certain powers, and people also have to deal with current crises like climate change. Okay, so much about that we already discussed. And today we will actually we'll just leave it at that, and we will look at the actual novel and just read through what I've written so far, and then compare it both with, the outline we did so far, and also with general writing guidelines. And we'll just question, because basically you shouldn't just write whatever comes to your mind, but you should think about, okay, has this something to do in the story, or could you just remove it and nothing changes in your character development, or in your plot development, in your theme? So we have to ask for each paragraph or for each chapter, what impact has this chapter for the reader? Does it build up suspense, mystery? Does it answer questions? Does it explain what the character is about? Or vice versa? Did we miss some chances of developing the character while explaining the story? So, for example, the example we will talk about right now. Okay, so 1 moment, switch over. Okay. So, onwards to the novel. No, that's not the novel. So, I also had, I'm basically writing at the same time as the novel, the world rules, and doing research on what the world is about. And that is basically my second project. That's the card game, and I'm basically explaining here how the 8 different factions develop additional technologies, and the actual technologies. Wait, I have to switch. The actual technologies I have on the other one, just so that you're caught up in terms of the world. I'll just switch here. Technologies here. Open with photos. Yeah. So these are different technologies people can use. And what I could do in the novel is to take individual technologies and use it as part of a chapter to as a basically bridge or vehicle, both to make it, of course, interesting for the reader. Hey, that's an interesting technology, but also what effect has that on our characters. So using that as a literary device, and all these different technologies. For example, this one, Mission to Venus. So that is, of course, one plot element that we're using. So they're sending a spaceship to Venus to examine what's going on. So that is basically in development in the backend, and the actual novel, again, that is 2 years ago. Just download it. Moment. Zip. Download and open. Yeah. So the idea back then was consciousness, and using that basically as the technology or the vehicle as a plot element. So. So I'll just read and then I'll discuss what could be done better. So, Alpha 1, general alert. Abort mission a failure. The computer voice kept repeating. Her blood-smeared hand was trembling above the button with the benign-looking label "Release Trusters." She was standing in the infirmary in front of the lifeless body of Commander Jeffrey. Tears were rolling down her face, dropping on the floor. "Computer," her voice trembled in desperation and hopelessness. The ongoing alert was briefly interrupted. "Yes, Dr. Callum?" "Retry connection to satellite Mars 74. Unable to comply, Dr. Callum. No signal to satellite Mars 74. Retry?" She closed her eyes, her face turned into a grimace. Images of her colleagues flashed in her thoughts. Orientation day, their training, their pre-launch press conference, and they were celebrated as heroes. The difficulties during launch. During the mission, they were not just her teammates, they became her friends. The master alarm came back online, returning her to reality. Designed to be annoying as possible, the sound filled the spaceship with a seemingly infinite loop of beep, beep, beep. Sobbing uncontrollable, she pressed the button. The mission to Mars has failed. Okay, so what do we actually learn here? We learn that she has colleagues, that those... But we learn that the commander has died and that she had an, of course, emotional connection to the commander. We don't, well, the computer says it's a mission is a failure, but we don't know what kind of mission. She said, or she remembered that they had difficulties during launch, and they were, they underwent training, and that the crew basically became her friends. And what else do we learn? That she probably lost more than just the commander as her friend, because she seems to be also the only one in the scene. Another point we get here, okay, there's a satellite connection Mars, so she must be on Mars. Here, her blood-smeared hand, so something must have happened, a fight, internal fight, or was it an accident? And something with released thrusters, but that doesn't really help us what's going on. And they are in the infirmary, so she probably brought the commander to the infirmary and tried to rescue him. So correcting my previous point, so maybe the blood stemmed from him, but maybe he had an accident. Then there's desperation and hopelessness, so it is apparently really hopeless, maybe because the mission could only be completed with the commander or not, or something else happened, so that is open. Of course, they are in a spaceship, and there's some sort of abort button, where I don't know what happened here or what would happen. Maybe she returns back. What else can we guess from here? Well, that is basically all. So what we don't. So I mean, we have now two options with this text. With this text, we're basically making a promise to the reader, all those open questions. Who are those people? What is her connection to her colleagues? Those are all not explained here, so it is a promise to be explained later. Here it depends on the narrator point of view we want to take. I mean, we could take the omniscient point, where we say, okay, where we explain what is actually going on, or we take the route here that I take back then, where I keep the reader basically in the dark, because at that moment she wouldn't give like exposition like, our mission has failed, we cannot do the thing, and now I have to return or so. I mean, she already knows that. She wouldn't start talking about the mission if she's alone in the infirmary. So all we can get here as a bystander is the situation, blood on the hand, alarms going off, and we get a little bit insight into her by being able to look at the memories that are flashing in front of her eyes, but we were basically kept outside. So taking this, I think it is okay. Well, I'm not the best critic of my own work, but it is a promise we have to keep, both from the narrator point of view. So we have to be careful about exposition, and we're making a promise to the reader. Okay, whatever is happening here, we will get to it and explain it soon, or maybe in a few pages or so. But we have to get back to it to explain what is going on. Because now, I mean, we have caught the reader's attention, and there's some sort of suspense. So, what was their mission? What happened during their mission? What has failed? Why is she? I mean, what is her emotional connection? Of course, maybe who was responsible for the problems during the launch. I mean, that is also one. What kind of difficulties during the launch, and maybe they already experienced some hardships during the mission because of those difficulties. Maybe that formed a team, and they had high hopes. Also, what does it mean about where is it? Here they were celebrated as heroes. So what kind of mission is that they were celebrated as heroes when they haven't even finished the mission even? So what has happened there? So all those, I mean, we can say it here, but all those sentences are promises for that we have to resolve. And back then I just wrote it. I thought, well, that is neat, but I didn't think about, okay, these are all promises and I have to resolve every open question here. So one way, of course, going along with it is to just continue like that, and hoping that I don't write myself into like a dead end and can't explain why they were celebrated as heroes before the launch, or can't explain what kind of difficulties they had during launch. And if I also give the promise like as a hard science fiction book, and really giving a proper explanation. So if I end up saying, okay, they had difficulties during launch, maybe the captain didn't find the keys or something like that, then, well, what's the payoff here? So that doesn't help much. So that is something we have to try to avoid. Yeah, and also here this is, I think, weak. During the mission, they were not just her teammates, they became her friends. Sure, but that is not something maybe you think about. I mean, you don't think about, oh, okay, they were my friends or so. Maybe you think about it, but not in those abstract terms. Maybe it is always better to show, not describe what is going on, because basically here we take over an omniscient point of view in this point. So a better way would be to also, I mean, this is basically here exposition, to also explain what is going on here without having to rely to basically read her mind what is going on. So if we would be able to describe this without having to read her, without reading her mind, this would be great. I don't know. It could be some screen where they or a picture on the table where with their of their press conference where they were celebrated. Could be. So that would be an option where we can get that one. Difficulties during launch, difficult to explain at this situation without looking back. So this would be more something that we should bring up later, maybe during a debriefing then back on Earth, where they talk about the difficulties during launch. This, of course, in this form adds a certain kind of mystery, but if this was a movie, how would you or show that she was thinking about the difficulties during launch without showing the launch itself? Of course, it would be a little bit boring if we started with the launch. Oh, okay, they had difficulties. I mean, it would be also a way to go by that we really not just say, okay, they were friends, but really to have a proper chapter on how they, what they did during launch, etc. So this is, I think, this one is the weakest part of the whole thing. Everything else is clear. It's all obvious what is going on. It is descriptive. It is dialogue. Well, maybe this other one, I think this is also not really useful. I mean, it is already implied that the mission to Mars has failed if we say it here, that the mission is a failure. And also when the master Lan comes here and sobbing, she presses the button. It is, I think, implied that it has failed. So that this is something I would change here. Okay, going on. One moment. So, next page. So. So, more text. Yeah. Okay, I will just read it again first, and then we will be discussing it. Okay. Wait, I'll move it a little bit. Okay, so Catherine was lying in bed, scrolling through the day's news, a habit she picked up during her new assignment. One article caught her attention. There again was a gut feeling that reminded her that her life was nothing one could call normal. Unconsciously, she brushed some hair out of her face, feeling the bump at the top of her head. Okay, at this point, again, I will just read the... we'll just read it and then we'll discuss it. Living on Venus makes Earth and its problems feel far away. The very reason she signed up for the job was to get away from it all and put her old life behind her. After what had happened, she could never go back to working in the medical field. And space exploration has changed so much, astronauts in the classical sense were no longer needed. In that regard, she was part of a dying profession. In her mind, the only reason Mars instead of Venus was ever even considered was that humans need to literally grasp things, an archaic yet understandable trait. People needed something concrete. They needed to feel their feet on the ground, living safely, hovering above the ground with a nice atmosphere, deflecting the sun's radiation at Earth's gravity. Inconceivable, she added sarcastically to her thoughts. Okay, here the first problems I see is again with the narration. Again, we're having this omniscient way of looking back instead of showing what has happened. I mean, that one is okay. But here, there again was that gut feeling that reminded her that life was nothing one could call normal. It is also something that wouldn't be shown in a movie or something like that. Also, one article caught her attention. We could also do that in a more active way, that and explain and show actually and explain what is going on. So she maybe taps on a certain article and selects that. Other than that, that is okay. Also, well, here a habit she had picked up during her new assignment. Well, why is that important to explain that this is a habit that she had picked up during her new assignment? Why is that important? I mean, again, what is the payoff of this explanation? Because also it is a very normal thing to do. She was lying in bed scrolling through the day's news. If that a habit she had picked up during her new assignment, then the payoff would have to be that she has somehow taken interest now in political ongoings, while previously she wasn't. So saying this would mean or would require us to say it to mention it somewhere else, that she wasn't political inclined, or that the political changes have a significant impact on her, or maybe that she thought that or thinks that she has some regret that she didn't talk about or didn't take interest in politics, and maybe that led to her problems. But just saying, well, she had picked up that during her assignment, that doesn't help anything in terms of character. Okay, for the next one, okay, living on Venus makes Earth and its problems feel far away. Well, again, show don't tell. In what way does that feel make you feel that? I mean, above we talked about the day's news, how she picked up that habit. At the same time, she says, okay, those problems feel far away. Okay, then the very reason she signed up for the job was to get away from it all and put her old life behind her. Well, again, what does that mean? What has happened? We don't know. We want to know. Again, we can write this, but again, these are additional promises we have to later explain. After what had happened, okay, that is a reference then back to chapter 1. She could never go back to working in the medical field. So why is it in the medical field? So does that mean that she's responsible in the medical sense? Again, more questions than answers. And space exploration has changed so much. Astronauts in the classical sense were no longer needed. In that regard, she was part of a dying profession. Okay, this doesn't work. For one, she said, okay, she works in the medical field, but then she says she's an astronaut. So Clemens from 2 years ago, make up your mind. In her mind, the only reason Mars instead of Venus was ever even considered, well, that is now. Here, of course, the challenge is, who is she talking to? So whenever you have only one person, it's harder to do that exposition, because those thoughts are more abstract usually, and she doesn't literally say, okay, living safely hovering. Maybe if she reads an article and comments on it or something like that. Oops. Okay. Given the developments on Earth, she felt lucky that not many people actually know what she was doing. Okay, that is okay, I think. I mean, that tells the reader basically, okay, this is she wants to live alone. But we already said that before, so what does this actually add? It seems humanity underwent a similar change to her own, moving inward, living a solitary life. So why did that happen? So we could say, okay, a pandemic or something like that happened. Sure, there was a difference. She was in Venus, they were on Earth, but considering the size of the universe, humans live a pretty solitary life. Well, she was happy to live a solitary life. The only thing that seemed to draw her back into the moment was the implant and the habits of her donor. Okay, I mean, that is a little bit blah, blah, blah. It's a little bit philosophical. This could be done better. Again, instead of explaining and giving philosophical thoughts, show this in a concrete news segment or something like that to the reader, and make the reader make their own decision what is going on. Moment. So just switching here. One moment. Okay. So, and we're continuing here. So now again we make a promise to the reader. The only thing that that seemed to draw her back into the moment was the implant and the habits of her donor. Again, instead of saying what drew her back, is to actually tell what is going on. Again, more exposition. The cutbacks in funding required the mission to Venus to take a special approach, and that was not just because it was on actually above another planet. Again, it's this I mentioned in a side sentence, but I think that also comes in the next chapter. Is the description where that spaceship actually is. I mean, it is floating above the clouds of Venus, hence the name. And instead of saying here, and that was not just because it was on another planet, I could maybe start the chapter by saying, okay, here's the spaceship that is hovering, and then zoom into the interior. Because of the massive costs of bringing human life to Venus and sustaining it there, as opposed to just sending robots, all Venusians, as she calls herself jokingly, are required to get a cortex implant. Again, Venusians could again be actually used in a conversation instead of just saying she calls herself a Venusian. Are required to get a cortex implant. So we already know that she has some sort of bump on the head, and we could again say, okay, she puts a cable into her head or something like that. We don't need to explain the internal ongoings. On Earth, highly trained specialists, the donors, for example, the engineers who repair the ship, have their cortex scanned. The neural patterns are then transmitted to the relay station on Venus. On Venus, the patterns are copied into the Venusian's cortex chip, making him or her ready to perform the work. Again, yes, true, but we could look at it from the outside and have the reader draw their own conclusions. And then goes again into exposition more. She read a lot of science fiction novels when she was younger. After the accident and her implantation, she was reminded of the stories of how computers merged with humans. But in one of the few emails to her mother, she explained, "Dear mother, I'm fine. No need to worry. It is nothing like those novels where you hear a voice telling you to do stuff. It feels as if you had a second gut feeling, only it originates from the chip, not the gut. You still feel you are in control, but you tend more to follow that new feeling." Well, that is again a way of doing exposition, but this could be explained in an actual, when she actually repairs stuff, instead of sending letters to her mother explaining it. It does work. I mean, it is a conversation with another person, but it is a little bit... Okay, her attention was back now on the article. Government employee dies in plane crash. Next to the article, a picture showed a young, good-looking man, probably in his 30s. She didn't know that person, but what does knowing mean? She did not know how to operate the complex machinery that kept the nitrogen converter up and running, yet her job was to repair and optimize it. She couldn't explain to someone how she does it. Well, she explained it to her mother, But when she's standing in front of the machine, she knows what buttons to press and in what order. Like explaining how to ride a bicycle, putting her actions into words was impossible for her, basic computer handling and programming aside. In the same way, she felt a strange familiarity with the man in the picture. I like that one, but again, it could be, instead of saying it is like standing in front of a picture, she could actually stand in front of a machine. She could actually stand in front of a machine, repair something, and then follow, and then the reader follows along. And then she could later turn to the newspaper and then experience the same feeling. So she shook her head and closed her browser. This is what the doctors have told her would happen now and then. Given the holographic structure of how the brain saves information, the process of extracting knowledge from a specialist and implanting it into someone else is bound to also copy some personal experiences with it. Again, instead of exposition and explaining it scientifically, it could be part of an actual conversation with a doctor explaining the issue. A new habit of reading the news was one of them. Now we get the payoff. So that is basically, well, we could have had a better setup before, so that this was never something she did before that mission, and only since she started with it. Okay, putting her pad down, her hand reached to the freshly brewed cup of tea. So why is that relevant? Freshly cup of tea on her nightstand, on the one of the luxury items up here, while the floating station. So now we go into the floating station. Did not have its own hydroponic garden. It was mostly focused around essential nutrients. She managed to convince Mission Control to use a small section for herbs and a variety of tea plants. Okay, now we get to know her personal approach more, and also her relationship to Mission Control that is all not that strictly controlled. She scanned the weather report, lovely 75 degrees with wind speeds of 61 meters per second and a relative wind speed of 0, an indicator that the Beagle 2 was circumnavigating the planet. So we could actually start with this and not end with that, because we want to know where she actually is. So we're actually moving currently out from her report outside the ship, and it could be the other way around. Like a fish in the stream. With these new words, she jumped up from the bed. Good morning, Catherine. You're looking beautiful. Would you like to start the Tuesday exercise routine? So moving things a little bit around and turning some of the expositions into actual conversations instead of just saying, okay, they said that. That would help, and doing a little bit more emphasis on the setup of certain things, like with the change of her habits. I think that would be good, because change of an habit is, of course, an important thing in character development. So we can't, or we shouldn't just throw it out here. So. And continuing, and let me check. Okay, this is also the last chapter. At least, I have some in the middle and some ending, but it's the last chapter, so we will go through those as well and then summarize. So we ended the last with the exercise, and now we jump basically after the exercise. One important thing, but I'll explain it after I read it. So, exercise program complete, shutting down implant. Catherine jumped off the treadmill and walked toward the bathroom. Her face remained emotionless despite her obvious signs of exhaustion. The smart mirror displayed a variety of statistics from heart rate to distance run and difficulty level. So here we could put in some technology exposition. That is, I think, fine. Catherine slowly came back to her senses. It felt like taking a nap, but awakening with a runner's high instead of drowsiness. While her exhaustion was written on her face, she was smiling at herself in the mirror. I think that this is well, especially because also of the jump for the reader. So the reader was taken out. So before we said, okay, hey, it's now time for exercise. And now, okay, exercise is complete. So there was a time jump, but she also experienced a time jump. So her thoughts turned back to the man she read about in the news. She was not a stalker, but when someone caught her attention, she usually became very curious and wanted to know everything she could find about that person. She was certain that she did not know the person, or did she? This is always a confusing situation for people with cortex implants. So we already had that, and it is, of course, here again kind of tricky how you explain that. The mind tries to make sense of having additional external information integrated into it, rather than somehow figuring out that there in fact exists an implant providing false memories. The subconsciousness constructs an internal model of self, the ego, using the most likely scenario. In this case, the scenario is that she is in fact familiar with the person but must have forgotten about him. The reason her thoughts now keep returning to him is that her mind faces the conflict, motivating her curiosity to find more about him in order to literally calm her nerves and resolve the contradictory input she's getting. So there's a lot of, and again, the point of narration of an omniscient narrator. And I think that is challenging, especially when talking about the mind and explaining what is going on. It is difficult to just explain it from the outside. So here I think I have to make a decision maybe to do the omniscient narrator part after all, or a mix between the omniscient narrator and the purely external view, so the more cinematic view. And the question is, of course, if that narrator in a movie would actually talk to the viewer, sorry, or if So if there's a actual narrator that tells her that. Okay, of course that would not be very easy. While her option could always be to turn down the activity of the implant. Adjustments take a full day and her shift started soon. So she's in a sort of a conflict of having to do her duties on the station to keep it running and having to endure those strange sensations given by the implant. Likewise, it is not like she can simply search for her donor's name to investigate what caused her feeling. There is a strict policy of anonymity when it comes to host-donor relations to prevent the very thing Catherine seems to entangle in now. So this would be a good point of, again, explaining why there is a strict policy and maybe give some examples how this new technology has changed the situation on Earth and maybe led to problems on Earth. Likewise, it is not like she can simply search for her donor. Well, we already had that. But even with the information, accessing Earth's internet is not possible by normal means. Sure, she gets regular updates, but those work mostly one way, like a newspaper, than an interactive tool. Well, now it's a lot more. The next section here is about how an interplanetary internet would work. Again, technological advances. We can look back. I think it could be done better, but I think, I personally like it to have those things here in between to look to look back. It doesn't really fit into the story though, so I have to think about how to include it better instead of just more exposition. Yeah, well, that is just explaining how an interplanetary internet would work. For actual research, a better approach was developed by scientists in remote search stations. Instead of making the requests, the scientists would program an artificial intelligence and upload it to a server on Earth's network. So I could instead say, okay, instead of her ruminating how research is difficult or was difficult, she should just call up the artificial intelligence, and I should try to find ways to include the reasoning why AI is better somewhere in between. Okay, continuing. Moment. Here's a question. If the side character make an important place in the story, then how to get it out from the story? Wait. If the side character makes an important or has an important place in the story, then how can we remove the side character again? Well, there's a certain onboarding. For example, here I have only explained the main character, how the main character has all her onboardings. So after the main character is introduced, maybe additional people are introduced, and then they are basically again maybe removed from the story. So they need a basically goodbye. I mean, it could be a death. Sorry, it could be a death scene, or it could towards the end of the story resolve. I mean, if you look at movies, then at the ending you have an epilogue where all the heroes of the movie say goodbye and go different routes. That is basically it in one way. I hope that's something you meant. Otherwise, just comment on it. So yeah, so basically you have to build up, introduce the character that accompanies the reader. I mean, as I've written here, Catherine encounters different technologies the first time maybe, or she explains it, or she's curious and reads about it or thinks about it, or we read her letters to her mother, and this way the reader gets to know more and more technologies. And maybe then once we have basically established connection in terms of time, in terms of place, in terms of content and environment and emotional connection to one character, we can introduce further characters to that person. And then of course we can remove that again later in the same sequence. So we add maybe 5 characters, then one leaves, and then one gets back on, and we are always at a number of characters that are currently part of the story. And towards the end, maybe there is a suspense where all the characters are there, and then it is quickly reduced and they go their different ways. And maybe at the end of the story, she's alone again in the spaceship. Depends on how we want to end it. Okay, continuing. So again, so more exposition. So here again, this is all more exposition. How about the AI? And again, this is about technology. I want to just cram in and talk about technology, but it's just my personal preference. Okay, Catherine decided to open a chat with her assistant. So now she talks actually with the assistant. Again, this could be the other way around, that she starts talking to a computer and the reader wonders, okay, what's going on? Who is she talking to? And then we discover step by step that, for example, it takes a long while to get it updated, or it has to learn, or something like that. Okay, Catherine decided to open the chat with her assistant and explained she wanted everything there is to know everything, well, about the person in the article, adding it might relate to the experiences of her donor. No problem, Catherine, I'll get right on it. With that, she switched off her pad and got ready for work. Work for her, so again, for work, so we could have had the whole work part at the beginning and then talk to her, have her talk to the AI and then explain the internet. And I did it the other way around. Okay, work for her usually meant checking the filtering systems. While it is an automatic system with several backups, a failed nitrogen trap, CO2 trap, or solar panel ultimately means the demise of the station. She fully trusted the programmers and engineers who built the station, but having an independent human rechecking the systems was part of the protocol, and she gladly followed it. Again, in what ways does she fully trust the programmers? We could explain why or how, maybe because of her previous experience on a spaceship or something like that. Absolute security was never possible. At university, again, more exposition. At university, she learned that devising a computer system that fails in less than 1 in 1 million times within 1 day is useless because of the probability of that very computer system getting hit by a meteor is higher. So that is, again, exposition. We could, it's nice, but why do we now explain that to the reader? It's just things. It's interesting if you're writing a nonfiction book. I come from not writing nonfiction books, but is it really something relevant now to the story? Or could we just use that at another part of the story? Basically, we can just skip it. Catherine, shift starts in 5 minutes. Please be seated on Research Station 2 and prepare for transfer of consciousness AA34 for analysis of the atmosphere. That was her signal. Specialists from Earth could take over and work on analyzing the atmosphere for future missions of Venus, likely the extraction of resources. Again, exposition. We could explain what is going on. Maybe she sees a mission briefing or something like that. And here, at least, that is what Catherine had been told. So instead of saying, okay, that is what Catherine had been told, so have someone tell Catherine that. That is more active. So she sat down on the research chair, adjusted her head to allow for optimal wireless transfer, closed her eyes, and slowly dozed off. Okay, so what we didn't have here is also no development. It's a lot of exposition of technology. That is fine. If you change the exposition in more active interaction, that will work. But going back to the first chapter, we still haven't fulfilled any of those promises here about what kind of mission was failed. We're keeping up the suspense, and we are still introducing the world. Question is, of course, at which point we actually resolve some of the suspense or increase the suspense, actually. So maybe what was about that failed or nearly failed launch, and what were the consequences of that failed Mars landing. So this is kind of lingering, and if the payoff for that, we basically, with each chapter where we are not talking about the setup, we're increasing the stakes. So if we not talk about it for 5 chapters, then the stakes must be really high. And if you resolve it with a simple, they missed their launch window and that was the problem, that is not very exciting. So it is a bad payoff. And we rather do that small payoff than much earlier or explain it right away instead of creating that suspense. So with each chapter, of course, the payoff must be better. Because at this point, I really want to know what is going on. So maybe as a last point for today, what I also, how I started this one is actually with a No, that is not that. Yeah, I started actually with the ending. But that was more abstract, with a lot of philosophy and with an outlook on the next book. And I really didn't do the proper payoff there. So what are next in line? So I will fix those open issues. I will include what I've written in the Word with my keyword search. Here with this one, and my keyword search here, what I had here, and think about a better one. So next time we will be actually writing those that. I'm not sure if I will actually do some preparation of writing under that. I want to have you take part of everything that I'm writing. Okay, again, if you have any questions or if you have ideas for the story, or if you have questions about your own story, or if you want to use this little space I'm creating at the moment to present your own story, just contact me. Just write a comment either here in Meetup or per mail at clemens@loaded.de. It's also linked in my YouTube channel. Then I can just show it here. Wait. Here's my address on the lower right. And yeah, just contact me and we'll do a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting and talk about your novel. Why not? And just seeing what we can learn from each other. In that regard, thank you for watching and see you next Sunday where I continue with the novel and part 4, then actually writing some stuff and inserting some of the keywords and key plot themes and have that together. In that regard, thank you very much and